This conference will now be recorded.
Mayor Tuggle, would you give us a update on Sarah when the time comes? When we start our
Yes,
meeting?
yes, sir, I will.
Good, good. Thank you. We had some people call in. Can you identify, say who's on the phone?
Yes, hi Gary. This is Kelly. I'm using my phone and the computer just to make sure I'm audible. Good morning.
Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning. Hey Gary. Gary's.
Yep, got two of them in the rain.
If you see me looking like I'm typing over here, I am paying attention. I just have taken notes on my computer. I'm not texting or whatever.
Morning, everybody. Good morning. Reed, what's for breakfast?
I didn't realize my camera was on, sorry. So there's-
Okay,
Real professional, sorry.
we need some donuts around here.
Yeah.
All right, Gary, how many more, or do we have enough for quorum?
We are close to a quorum. 1, 2, 3, 4. We probably need one more, but, we did have a little change in the meeting location, so there may be somebody trying to reach us that using the old address. So give it one more minute and we can get started.
Probably a lot more than what you can have it ping your phone. If you didn't want to take your computer home, they would ping your phone telling you age 24 as a alarm. It's that. I was wondering how they're still doing at that corner.
Hey, Gary, can you hear me?
Is this Rosalie?
This is Susan.
Susan, hi there.
Hey,
Hi,
how are
yes.
you?
Hey, we're doing well. We can hear you. Thank you for
Good.
identifying yourself. Yep.
Is there a way to mute this?
To mute,
Uh,
to mute
on your
yourself?
cell phone.
Yes. Do y'all do like a mute from your end?
I can mute you if you'd like. I don't know how we can notify you to unmute you from the app, but I can mute you if you are just.
Oh,
if you'd like.
okay. There's sometimes there's like a *6 or something, but we don't have that, do we?
I don't think so. If you're just using the phone call in, I don't know if there's a. I actually don't know if there's a mute option. I apologize, but I mean, I can manually mute you, and then
If there's a vote, I guess unmute or something.
yeah, I can do that if you'd like.
Background information, some stuff going on here, so I didn't want to disturb the meeting.
Okay. Gary, you ready? We got enough?
Yes, sir. I think it's time to start. Thank you, everybody, for showing up this morning. Welcome.
All right, I'd like to welcome everybody and first welcome some new members we have today, Mr. Wadaka from Lynchburg and Mr. Payne from Amherst. Before we get started, Gary had asked to give an update on Miss Sarah. Mr. Payne, y'all seem to be in contact. Would you like to give that?
All right, I'd be glad to. Sarah is healing up. I think most of her internal injuries are pretty well healed or close to completely healed up. Her major issue right now is her vision. She doesn't really have much peripheral vision to the left, and she's still got some spots and issues with her vision. She can see a distance fairly well, and it's correctable, I think, to 20/25. I can tell you her mind is as sharp as ever, and she's engaged. I was at 2 meetings with her yesterday, a finance committee meeting and a planning commission meeting. She can't drive. That's her biggest challenge right now, and she has some trouble reading. And of course, it's the stress that it tires her out pretty quickly. But she's well beyond where they thought she would be. We're going to talk to council next week at their meeting about a plan for her easing back in. And hopefully, if all goes well, she'll be back in the office around the 1st of October.
Thank you, Mr. Payne.
Sure.
Hey,
And
Tuggle?
yes,
In the room with me here at the Planning District Commission office is Appomattox Mayor Richard Connor and Appomattox Town Manager Gary Shannenberger. So they're on the audio part of our meeting.
well, welcome, gentlemen. Moving on, next part, the approval of the minutes from the June 29th meeting. If everybody has had a chance to go over them, is there any corrections? And if not, I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. May I have a second, please?
Second,
And that was,
me, Kim.
oh, thank you, Kim. Okay, as in the past, all those opposed, please let me know. So motion is carried unanimous. Next item, I'm going to throw over to you, Mr. Christie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We at the Planning District Commission bring ideas to you for projects in our community, and particularly with our COVID going on, this is important that we think about what might help to keep our economy and our region moving forward. We have over the last couple of years talked about an economic development district designation. That's important so that jurisdictions, particularly those jurisdictions that are not financially stressed, can have access to the Economic Development Administration funds when they have a project that is needed. If you're an economic development district, then those more wealthy communities can get access without being distressed. We found out that in order for us to reach that designation, we have to modify our SEDS document with two components. One is a chapter on resiliency, and one is a chapter on rural economic development. It's not just us, but every region is going through this same requirement. Even those economic development districts who are already designated are having to put a SEDS chapter in for resiliency and for rural economic development if it's not already there. We bring this to you at this time because it might be smart if we can piggyback that project or that writing of those chapters onto a project that Economic Development Administration would fund. Then we might be able to do the two birds with the one project. And so we bring to you three ideas today about grants, projects that staff thinks we ought to talk about. One is to look at helping businesses with air handling. We think that, and
Gary, can I interrupt a second before you get into the ideas to try to understand these economic development districts? These are Virginia districts that are managed by VEDP?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with the Economic Development Partnership. These are federally designated regions that have the designation as an economic development district. It's much like parallel to the MPO, where the MPO is the Highway Department's regional transportation planning agency. Economic Development District is a regional designation of the Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration.
And so we have yet to apply to become such a district, and that district will be our existing boundaries as a region?
It could be, it should be. Every jurisdiction has to agree to participate. So we have to get all the jurisdictions to go on record to say, yes, we will be a part of that economic development.
What does that mean? All the surrounding counties surrounding us?
All of the counties in our jurisdiction, in our SEDS area. So our region should be its own district.
So you're going to need resolutions from each of the governments?
Correct. I don't know about the towns. We would certainly need it from the city and the counties. I'm not sure if towns would be brought into it or not.
And this section of the SEDS document, these two additional chapters, would these chapters require there are a lot of effort, a lot of people played into creating that document. And then there's an initiative council on every single sort of topic area. Would these have to have their own initiative council set up?
Kelly, can you answer that one?
I don't think that you have to do it that way, Dean. In effect, when the SEDS was submitted, if you recall, in earnest, first EDA didn't want to approve our SEDS because there was a lapse in the rural side of the SEDS. We're a 60% rural area, but there wasn't that much within the SEDS that talked about the needs of the rural community. But they passed our SEDS, so I do want to make one clarification, if you don't mind, Gary. Our SEDS currently allows any of those localities with the approved SEDS to be eligible for the funding. An EDD district designation, provides a conduit to additional opportunities, and more importantly, what it does is it provides a designated amount of money to the PDC so to do continuous activities that the localities might want. So I just want to point out, you don't have to be the EDD in order to apply for EDA programs. However, being an economic development district just provides some continuity of funding and a little bit in a stream, one additional stream. So it's one extra arrow in your quiver, in effect.
Okay, so the first thing you're asking for, Gary, is that you all be directed to proceed with becoming an EDD. And then, well, now you're about to present ideas on what the EDD could be doing.
I think what is a better way to phrase it is that we recognize we have a need to create 2 more chapters for our SEDS. Now, to do that, we bring you some ideas for bigger projects, and we would piggyback the writing of these chapters onto these other projects in order for the grant folks to pay for it.
To like the chapters.
Yes.
Okay, I'll shut up now.
Kelly, did you have anything else to add?
I've got a question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kim. I've got one too. So.
Okay. So before we talk about projects, do you have some idea of how much resources we're going to have to apply to whatever projects are desirable?
Well, they're mostly these would be COVID related projects, and we think that there are several grant opportunities for COVID related grant projects that would give us plenty of money to meet those projects.
Are we talking millions of dollars? I mean, if we're talking $250,000 loans, you must be talking millions of dollars.
I would say a couple $1 million, maybe $2.5, $3 million.
Okay.
Kim, the program is through EDA developed a special. It started out at 1.4 billion, and for COVID-related activities. And those communities that were already designated economic development districts, they were allowed to kind of tap into those dollars first, and they didn't have to go through a competitive route. They kind of had a designated route to go after, and they had an eligibility of up to $2 million without competitive. So the $1.4 billion, it's competitive, and if you are able to tap into those funds, it's an 80-20 federal fund versus match fund equation, whereas if you're going in for just traditional SEDS, similar to what the Alliance went in for the CVPDC application, which was a 50-50 match. And if we just went in to try to address what the EDA said was the reason they wouldn't approve our area as an economic development district currently, because they see a lapse in our CEDS. If we tried to address that in isolation, that would be an application at a 50-50 match rate. So what we're trying to do to see is if we can weave in another project concept that allows us to kind of flip the switch and move into that 80-20 application rate to kind of see if we can kill two birds with one stone, if that's possible.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is Frank. Could I hop in with a couple questions? So, Gary, I see that we're trying to create an economic development district because there's a pot of money out there. I've looked at the list of projects we're going to talk about here in a minute. I see that they're primarily related to COVID. But it seems to me back when we reset sort of organizational structure with the Alliance, we passed economic development to the Alliance. So while it appears there's an opportunity here for the PDC to reconstitute itself as an EDD to get access to a couple of $1 million, and in the immediacy of a COVID response, that may make some sense. But long term, if we designate ourselves as an economic development district, does it in any way reconfuse roles that have been sorted out now over the past few years as to what the PDC does for the region versus what the Alliance does for the region?
No, I don't think it confuses things. We will continue to be the economic development planning group, just like we've led the CEDS with the last couple of cycles. So if we have an opportunity to help with a project, then that's complementary to what any other economic development, whether it's local or regional, might do. But I don't see it as mixing up projects, and I think that our local governments would feel more comfortable with the planning district as the planning agency for the economic development district, rather than another non-governmental agency.
I don't know, to me, we combined our economic development portion into the chamber, and now we're setting our economic development portion back up again. Could the Alliance apply to be an EDD?
I suspect they could. Again, they have to get every jurisdiction to agree to participate. And right now, we have Appomattox County as not participating with the Alliance. So,
well, it seems like this audit is something that maybe needs to be sorted out with the Alliance too, because that's why they were set up the way that they are, to do this sort of thing. Now I'm really, Frank, you got me really confused.
Perfect. My work here is done.
Can I say something? Do you mind? I do think when the CEDS was developed, there was an element. If you read our CEDS right now, it was what was recognized from EDA. It does read like a exclusively economic development document. It talks about job retention, but I think something that kind of got lost in translation when that was developed, which is that the EDA also can fund large infrastructure projects and, hazard mitigation projects. And, so I think the way our CEDS reads currently, it is a very heavy sort of business job retention, site selection. And so, that might be the component that gets a little lost, but it does come back to, Frank, your point. If the CEDS, and I guess that's y'all's decision, which is whether the CEDS really takes that sort of exclusive business retention, business side, or you kind of open it up to the full definition by which the economic development has capability to fund projects.
I just think in the long run, we need to make sure that the planning district has a role in economic development. And our role is in planning. Now, if you don't think that we ought to be doing these projects, that's okay. We won't do that. We have traditionally done that, but if that's a feeling that somebody else is better to do that, that's fine. But I just think that it's appropriate and a good thing for us to have that foot in at the table.
So Gary, would you be considering forming an EDD if it wasn't for the availability of this money? I mean, this has been on the table for years,
That's
right?
correct.
I mean, I remember it from 4 or 5 years ago.
That's correct.
So is the impetus here because there's money available?
Well, we found out that they were not going to approve us as an economic development district because we didn't have these chapters in our SEDS. That if we put the chapters in the SEDS, then we can move forward with that application. So we want to put the chapters in the SEDS at the least cost as possible. So at least that's where staff was coming from. So providing these projects to utilize the federal dollars to get the chapters done, we thought was a time to take advantage of some outside money coming in.
So I'm confused though. You can use this grant money to write these chapters?
We would weave in that component to the grant money. It would be a multi-purpose grant.
It'll be in it.
I don't understand what comes first here. We need that be an EDD to get the grant, and we're going to use the grant to write the justification to be an EDD?
So you don't need to be an economic development district to apply for these grant monies.
So Gary, what I understand is the process we've worked through here is staff sought out to be an EDD because that might be beneficial to apply for some economic development planning funds, but we could not do that because the EDA said we weren't properly addressed in the SEDS document. So my understanding of the process here is staff said, okay, let's amend the SEDS to enable us to be an EDD so that in the future we can get this money. Concurrent with that, this money's there and there's a COVID need, so you've coupled that to this proposal to use it for COVID. Have I followed the process correctly, or is there a different flow there? I'm like Kim, I'm trying to figure out how we got to the project proposal today, just so I make sure I understand the flow.
The COVID grant funds are special, and the monies that the Economic Development District would come from a different pot that is more competitive. So that because the COVID's there, anybody can apply for that. It's more difficult for the traditional job creation or infrastructure money that the Economic Development Administration would bring.
So we don't have to be an EDD to apply for the grants?
For the COVID funds, that's correct.
But we have to have a 20% match?
Yes, the match is typically 50% for non-COVID projects and 20% for COVID projects. At one time, that's even negotiable about the match, but for our purposes, we're planning on 20%.
So I'm back then to my resource question. If we're going to get $2 million in federal funds for these projects, we need to find $400,000 in local money to match?
It depends. We need to find $400,000 somewhere. It depends on what the project is as to where that money might come from.
So, for example, if we were helping private business put people up in hotels, they could maybe pay the 20%?
Perhaps. We might be able to get that from DHCD. There may be the local foundations. We just have to look around to see where it could come from. But business community might be a source.
Hey, is there any other questions, Gary? Do you want him to just go ahead and proceed with the staff ideas, I guess you could say they had?
And I think we'll have a good conversation with EDA about providing greater than 20%, 80% of the match. But at this point, until we have a project to talk to them about, we haven't pursued it. And if you feel that we should not pursue any of these projects, just let me know. We'll move on to the next topic.
Gary, this is Frank. I just want to make sure what we're being asked. So as I look through the COVID projects, I understand we do not have to be an EDD to have that conversation. So I'm happy to have that conversation today to see if there is a role for the PDC in applying for COVID money, you know, at the, was it 80-20 or some other match rate? That's one line of questions. Then there's a second piece. Should the PDC become a EDD? And the two have been coupled, but they don't necessarily have to be, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm happy to hear staff's suggestions as to what we might apply for to provide some COVID relief. I'm still a little unclear on what the agency's role would be as an EDD long term.
Any other comments before I jump into those specific project suggestions?
Well, before you get into the project suggestions, as you explained it, Gary, the difference between you and the Alliance is, I guess, you all are the planners. You're looking at the future. I assume you're looking at would be looking at economic development out at 10 years or more, while the Alliance is focused on the present and the very near term. Because, you know, in my experience with the Alliance so far, they haven't done any long-term planning other than the participation in the CEDS itself. So is that a fair? I mean, I would love to, you know, include Megan in on this discussion so that she would agree that, you know, you then become an arm, the planning arm of the Alliance. Just like, you know, you're an adjunct to all of our planning staffs. Is that how the Alliance would see you too? Because, you know, we can't set up a conflict here between these two organizations of which we're all a member of.
I don't see a conflict. I see each one of us have roles that complement each other.
Well, so just for example, if these two grants, any of the three of the grants, the airflow, the lodging, or the revolving loan fund, if the PDC reached out to potential applicants for those programs, I think there would be some confusion as to why that wasn't coming from the Alliance, because all of these folks are probably members or potentially members of the Alliance, and that could actually be something you say, hey, it'd be great if you're a member of the Alliance. If you want to take advantage of this money, this region has the opportunity to put its hands on. I think there would be some confusion as to why that was coming from the PDC. Plus, I think the Alliance is a great mechanism for reaching out to regional businesses and telling them about these opportunities.
Mallory, can you unmute Susan Adams's phone and see if we can get her on the conversation since Appomattox is not part of the Alliance?
I'm here.
Hi there.
Hi.
Have you heard the conversation so far about the role of the Alliance serving as the regional service delivery?
Yes, I have. And I'm a little bit confused as to the long-term planning aspect of the EDD. But I will say, and I will offer also, that I feel like we're having a conversation and possibly PDC and Megan should have already talked about it and come up with next steps, and that would have resolved a lot of the questions that we're having now. So that's kind of where I am. I'm not sure if we're ready to have this conversation on the specific projects, if there's still questions about the formation.
I guess I was interested in your thoughts about the Appomattox County businesses and the Appomattox Board of County Government's perspective on the alliance in terms of the services that they provide.
Well, we're also a member of the Small Business Development, and they are a component of the alliance. And I don't think it necessarily means we would be excluded just because we're not a member. I think it's how the grant would be written. It would be the language that was set forth in that.
Okay, thank you. And certainly, I'm happy to work with Megan to think through this concept. I just do think that you're missing an opportunity at the PDC to ensure that your government's well represented in this long-term planning process. And if we don't apply for any grants, that's okay. Let's work for us, and maybe the money will be pursued. That's we're happy to whatever you think, but these funds are out there at the EDA level for several years now. That's $1 billion worth of money they can't spend all at one time. So it'll be around for a while.
Well, if it's a responsibility of the PDC to offer a match, and we are a member of the PDC, I'm not exactly sure how we could be excluded anyway.
With respect to the 3 ideas for projects, would it be useful to use maybe the resources of the Alliance to reach out to the business community and see if these are the sort of things they have a need for? I hate to pass on federal money if it's available and can do something that's beneficial to the region, but do we know that these are 3 things that regional businesses would really like to get to, have, or is there something else that they think they might need with this money?
That's a good question. Good question.
I would recommend you get with Megan and talk about this and frankly bring this back. I won't be here to hear it probably, but that would be my suggestion.
Do that.
So
Everybody
that's
comfortable with that approach?
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to ask. Is everybody comfortable with Kim's suggestion, and it gets brought back at a later time after Gary and Megan get together and work out a solution?
Yes, I prefer that too.
Okay. And we'll just do this on a consensus. If everybody's good with it, just nod your head and we'll move on. Except for those that I can't see on the phone, just I'll accept that you're waving your head or nodding your head. All right, Gary, let's move on to the next one, number 4 then, sir.
Thank you, sir. Every year we talk about PDC dues. We don't have to make a decision until November. But since we had this committee meeting, I thought we would just kind of run up the flagpole. We haven't raised or changed our dues for several years. Typically, we talk about a 5-cent rate increase, and I've got a chart in your packet that shows that would generate about $13,000. It's not a lot of money, but it is a money that helps us both to match our transportation grants and provides us some flexible money that's not necessarily project related. A second concept to think about is a cost of living increase for our dues, raise it up by whatever that cost of living is in September. In 18-19, that was about 1.9%. And you see that generates about $3,000. So we always change our dues based on population, and most of our jurisdictions are going up. That generates a few dollars. But I ask for your thoughts about whether to continue having conversations with the full commission or let it go another year. What do you think?
Don't everybody jump in at once.
Well, it seems to me that this is a discussion to be led by Bedford, Campbell, and Lynchburg as they're being asked for the most here.
So this is 5 cents for option 1, right?
I'm sorry, Reed, I didn't understand.
The increase is 5 cents in option 1 per capita.
Each 1 penny generates maybe $2,500, so you can pick a number. We just picked 5 cents as a place that. And you can see from the other jurisdictions, other PDCs, they range all the way up to $1, $1.25.
So I would say that I would prefer option 1 if we're going to do that, as opposed to an automatic increase, just so we go back each year, or whenever we do it, rather than automatic.
Yeah, I would not think we'd have an automatic system. I would think every time that the dues increased, regardless of the methodology, it would be approved annually.
Okay.
Gary, what's the amount in our reserve fund right now?
Rosalie, you with us on the phone? My best memory is it's
Yes,
about.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Did you hear that question of what's
I
our
did.
reserve amount?
In my mind, after we've taken out the 134 or whatever it is for the community college, it'll be about in the 850 range. So we said we always want to have at least 600 in our fund balance. So.
And it is great to have that reserve. What I'm hoping for is eventually to get enough money to be able to add staff, and you would not add staff from the reserve funds.
Okay, Gary, are you looking for a vote today on this or just a recommendation or what?
Some direction, whether to put it off another year or keep the conversation going, or if there's other pieces of information you might need.
I would suggest that we may revisit this next year. With the uncertainty of the receipt of revenues in the localities and everything else we're facing, I think the timing's just not good.
That's a good point. I understand.
Would anybody else like to jump in on that?
Well, is there a pressing need at the moment for increased revenue? I mean, we've adopted a budget balanced for the coming year. Are you, and is this, when would this take effect? I assume in the next fiscal year?
21.
Pardon?
July 2021.
Yeah, okay.
But jurisdictions start working on their budgets late fall, and so we need to tell them late fall. But certainly there's always a pressing need. It doesn't generate enough money to really do anything with in a single shot. It takes cumulative action, and our cost of business continues to go up with various things. I'm comfortable either way. We put it off, we'll continue to manage what we have. If you want to keep talking about it, take it to the bigger groups, then we'll see what.
I think for Lynchburg, we're talking about, it's like $4,000, so I'm not too worried about that. If there's a pressing need, if there's a need, I'm comfortable with that. That we want to do that for fiscal year 21. I think you know, if we can demonstrate that need, that's fine.
Well, let me throw out a suggestion. How about if we figure out what we want as a recommendation from this group? And if it is to consider it, let's take a recommendation from this group to the larger group when the full PDC meets. If we want to continue this conversation, how does that sound?
Okay, so then to put a motion on the table, I move that we recommend to the PDC, the whole board, that they consider this increase according to option 1 for the upcoming fiscal year. And just to give us something to start from, we can vote that up or down. We all recognize that inflation hits and it's easier to raise rates by small increments than large ones when you're desperate and it's too late. At the same time, we're all fearful of mission creep and growing expenses just because the money is there. So, Reed's comments that a demonstrated need would be helpful to present to the entire board is what I think. So that motion's on the table.
I'll second that.
And that was, who seconded that? I'm sorry.
Reed.
Okay, thank you, Reed. Is there any further discussion on that? Mr. Frank, you
Mr. Chairman, this is Frank. I don't know if you can hear me. I've been having some audio problems.
Got you now.
Okay, great. I'd like to introduce a substitute motion that we go with the cost of living. I think a modest increment tied to something objective like COLA seems reasonable. It wouldn't be automatic year over year, and it's a smaller increase. I think, as Dean has suggested, we don't want to wait until the increase has to be monumental to levy it. Conversation with the full board around COLA, to me, seems a little more systemic and a smaller bite financially. So I'd offer that as a substitute. And I'm sorry to have to do it as a substitute, Dean. I just couldn't mic up earlier for the discussion.
That's okay. I accept that as a substitute. That's fine. One or the other. And I accept your logic, Frank. It makes more sense.
I would second Frank's motion.
And is that Susan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So we have a second for young Mr. Rogers' motion. Is there any further discussion? Okay, senior Mr. Rogers, we comfortable with going with Frank's motion? Then you agree?
I withdraw
to mine. That's where I was going with that. Thank you very much, sir. So once again, all those opposed to presenting this option that was presented by Frank Rogers to the full PDC for the number 2 option for the cost of living increase, if you are opposed, please let us know. Okay, therefore none being opposed, that motion is carried. So Mr. Christie will bring that to the next full PDC meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My next item has to do with Juneteenth. Many of our employees this year asked about Juneteenth. The Planning District Commission did not take that as a holiday, and best I can come up with is to just suggest we talk about adding it to the holiday list. Do you have a direction about what your jurisdictions are going to do with Juneteenth on a permanent basis?
So Gary, Campbell doesn't follow any set schedule. We take a few of the state holidays and then offer floating holidays for everybody else. So The most Campbell would contemplate doing is if and when Juneteenth becomes a state holiday, we would contemplate offering another floating day, but we wouldn't necessarily make Juneteenth a specific holiday.
In Amherst County, we simply adopt the state calendar, and whatever extra the governor throws out, we take that automatically. Well, by throw out, I mean by offer to employees. So anything the governor adds, that also becomes a holiday for us.
The town also follows the state calendar.
As does the town of Appomattox.
So
Yeah,
I
let's
would
just
suggest
have-
maybe the first thing, Gary, is to wait to see what the state does. If they establish it as a state holiday, then you've got something to consider.
Or Gary, are you suggesting that the PDC start following the state holiday sort of writ large?
We have not made that recommendation. That's always a possibility. It would not change very much from our current list. It certainly makes it easier in terms of not having to have the conversation if we just follow what the state and the governor does. We can certainly have this conversation in March when the General Assembly has met and done their thing. To me, it's very likely that they're going to make that as a holiday for the state employees. So if that's your thought, we can put it off till March. If you'd like, we can start thinking about and bring back to you a comparison between our little list and the state list.
That would be the way to present it. You know, to see where you currently stand and what we're adding or not adding, and what the big difference is. You know, I recognize that for you as a servant to all the localities, if the localities are not at work, that simply gives you a quiet day at work, but you're not able to communicate, you're not able to collaborate or anything else. So it certainly makes sense to be on the state calendar if we are.
It's a mix in our jurisdictions of who follows the state and who does not. Well, then how about in March, I'll bring back, after the General Assembly takes their action, I'll bring it back the topic again in March or April, and we'll compare whether the state list is appropriate or just what to do. Is that good?
One thing I'd like to throw in, and I mean, if you're going to go by the state list, doesn't it seem maybe you want to try to resolve it, and you can put a caveat for the Juneteenth, but don't you want to resolve it before the first of the year when the new list does kick in?
I think we're good waiting until after the General Assembly takes their action on Juneteenth, and we would put it in effect for July the 1st or even the following year. I think there's time after the General Assembly meets for us to take action. I think we're okay. I don't think we have to do it early before the General Assembly meets.
Okay. So with that, we can. Excuse me?
I was just asking if there's anything else so we can keep on moving, get to the next topic.
Let's move on, young man.
Thank you, sir. I'll bring the General Assembly membership of our PDC. In the days before Region 2000, we did not have any General Assembly members on our board. When Region 2000 was reorganized, they added a member of the House of Delegates, a member of the Senate, and what was then the Economic Development Council. Over the years, the participation of the General Assembly members have been poor. We tended to find one who was willing to serve, and that person served multiple years. right now, we have Mark Peak as our Senate member, and we have nobody serving as a House delegate member, because there's not been interest. I bring to you two choices. One is, let's ask Kathy Byron if she would be interested in serving. She did serve a couple of years in the 2012, 2014 time period, and she may be willing to serve again. But I bring a bigger concept that we ought to think about whether it's the right combination to have those General Assembly members on our board at all. That, to me, it's never worked well where they gave active participation, and sometimes it's even at cross purposes where we have different ideas of what we support compared to what they support. The General Assembly rules require us to have a majority of elected officials on our board, so we would have to move the alliance into a non-voting status if we drop the General Assembly members, and come up with one additional elected official, which has in the past been a second elected official from one of the jurisdictions that would rotate around in order to have that majority of electeds. So this morning, I just bring to you the concept of, are we sure we want to have the General Assembly members continuing to serve by name on our board of directors?
So do they serve as voting members?
Yes, yes.
So by not showing up, they simply make it harder to make a quorum sometimes.
Well, we don't make 50% rule for our quorum. We only require 6 people for our quorum, so that's not an issue.
Okay.
So they have been board members to a great degree in name only.
Gary, I don't have a strong feeling either way, but I do think this touches back on another conversation we've sort of picked up, and I'm not sure where we've moved it. And Mr. Tuggle, I'd welcome your insight on that, which is the engagement of elected officials generally in the PDC. Having an elected representative from the State House with us is great, but if there's a reason they're not participating, perhaps it's good to know what that is before deciding whether to keep inviting them or not.
Yeah, I agree, because I know we've had the discussion about getting elected officials, and I still think that is a discussion that we need to definitely explore more. But I agree with Mr. Rogers. We need to reach out to the ones that we're putting on the board or asking to serve and see what can they do, or what can we do to help facilitate them showing up or even participating more about, since we're using a lot of right now the virtual meetings. What can we do to get them to dial in on the phone and become part of the meetings?
And we will have that conversation with the elected folks. I just haven't done it for a couple of reasons, but we will have that conversation. Well, just think about this concept of reorganizing, and we can come back to it at another time. In the short term, do you want me to ask Kathy Byron if she'd be interested in serving, or just hold off on that until we have the conversation?
I don't see any problem with you sending a letter to all of them and explaining to them all of the big things that we are engaged with and engaged on, and that should pique somebody's interest. And if it doesn't, that would be useful for us to know. I mean, you know, you talk about what's going on with Go Virginia and the training center and the transportation projects in planning. I mean, if these people want to lead and put their mark on the future of this region, this is a place to do it. And if they don't, then thank you very much and have a nice day. And if nobody's interested in doing that, then I think that's then worth, and when I say interested, I mean committing to showing up. But if they're not interested, then maybe it's time to just say goodbye and write them out so that we don't waste our time and energy on it any further.
Mr. Christie, I think that would be a good avenue to explore. Let's hear what they got to say, and like Senior Mr. Rogers says, if they want to come to the table, let's bring them. If they don't, we'll just push the chair up and move on.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That's a good approach.
All right, number 7.
We have officers that we will vote on at our next meeting, and you know, we have looked for a quorum of 9, a super quorum, in order to consider a change of the bylaws related to whether the chair can succeed herself. And up until now, we haven't been able to get that super quorum in place. So we'll have that discussion if we can get that at our next meeting. But also at the next meeting, we'll talk about the officers for the current year. Mayor Richard Connor has left the room, but he's been willing to serve as the chair for the current year if he's so elected. So we'll have both the conversation about changing the bylaws plus the election of officers for the new year next year. And if there's any comments or suggestions, it'd be good to hear it now before we go into that meeting.
Gary, I would like to throw something out that doesn't have really anything to do with the slate of officers, but we dealt with it this year, and I know this year was an unusual circumstance with Sarah's accident. But when it came back to me then, where I was reviewing the weekly checks and everything, and we had to wait to get a stamp made, so either Rosalie didn't have to come to me in Amherst, or I had to go to Lynchburg every week to review these. I think when the new slate comes in, that whoever is the chairperson should also have a stamp made too, in case something happens or somebody gets sick or something like that. Like I said, that doesn't have anything to do with the slate, but I think that's a thing that we need to go ahead and do.
Thank you for that suggestion. Good idea. If there are no comments on this slate of officers, then we'll just move on to the next topic. But I didn't want anybody to say anything that while we're in this comfortable setting before we bring it to the full board.
Looks like a good group to me.
Move on.
Mr. Chairman, just as a FYI, we have hired a transportation planner. Ada Hunsberger is on board now. She is working with Scott for the next month, September. Thank you, Dean. And the new operation, there won't be a director. Both of the transportation planners will report to me instead of having a supervisor over the other. So that they will split the duties among themselves, and we've got it organized so that we try this new model, see if this works without that supervisory layer in the middle. Is there, the next topic, number 9, is there interest this year in a regional legislative recommendations? Is there any reason to have one or not to have one regarding a list to go to the General Assembly. Typically, we work on that in the fall and have it ready for December 1st. Any feedback in terms of the benefit or the non-benefit of a regional legislative action list?
Well, I'm sorry, did you say, has this been something we've done in the past?
We have kept it pretty short in the past, 2 or 3 items. Not a great long list. Oftentimes it's just echoing what a jurisdiction might have on their list.
Gary, I recommend we follow that course. Maybe Appomattox or Lynchburg or Campbell has a matter in their own legislative program that they'd like a little more oomph behind and may have a regional impact. And so as the localities develop those legislative priorities, I suggest the PDC stay open to hearing that. Also with things going on around state funding for law enforcement, education, desires that COVID funding be extended, there may be an opportunity that's a little clearer after the special session in terms of what we want to convey on a regional basis. So I'm very open to it. I don't have a specific recommendation at this point, but I think it's a good extra voice to have to support the members if necessary.
Thank you. And that's all the business that I have. If anybody has any other business to bring before us.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay. If nobody else has any business, guys, thank y'all for putting up with me for the last year, and we'll move on from here. So take care, and I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciated your work. So I'll extend a note of gratitude. Thank you, and make a motion that we adjourn.
We have a motion. May I have a second?
Second.
A second for Mr. Wadika. All those that do not want to close the meeting, say something. Meeting is adjourned. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Thanks, everybody.